The thunder crashed overhead as Dahlia O'Connor fought to keep her footing in the churning mud. Behind her, the shouts of men and barking dogs pursued her through the night sounds of certain death if they caught her. Her sodden dress clung to her body, weighing her down as she stumbled forward through the torrential downpour that had turned the Arizona Territory into a treacherous quagmire. It was 1878, and she had been running for 3 days. 3 days since she had witnessed the murder of her father by the Sutton gang, 3 days since she'd grabbed what little she could carry and fled the only home she'd ever known. They wanted her dead too. She'd seen their faces, could identify them all. Dahlia's vision blurred, her lungs burning with each desperate breath. The distant flicker of a campfire had drawn her forward, her last hope in a landscape that had offered nothing but cruelty. But her body had reached its limit. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed into the mud beside a large chestnut stallion, tethered near the small fire that had beckoned her forward. Mason Yates had been minding his own business, huddled under a makeshift tarp shelter as the rain poured down around his small camp. He'd been on the trail for weeks, driving a small herd of cattle north to sell in Prescott when the storm had forced him to stop and wait it out. The sudden whinny from his horse, Thunder, pulled him from his thoughts. "What's got you spooked, boy?" Mason murmured, reaching for his Winchester rifle as he rose to his feet. The dancing flames illuminated a crumpled form beside his horse, a woman, face down in the mud, unmoving. Mason dropped his rifle and rushed forward, kneeling beside the fallen figure. Gently he turned her over, revealing a face as pale as the moon, framed by rain-soaked auburn hair. She was alive, but barely, her breathing shallow and rapid. "Miss, can you hear me?" Mason asked, but her eyes remained closed, her body limp in his arms. With a swift decision born of necessity, Mason lifted her from the mud. She felt light, despite her drenched clothing, and frighteningly cold. The sound of distant voices and dogs carried on the wind, and Mason's eyes narrowed as he scanned the darkness beyond his camp. Someone was pursuing her. Without hesitation, Mason carried the unconscious woman to Thunder. With practiced ease, he mounted his horse while cradling her against his chest. He kicked dirt over his campfire, gathered his rifle, and urged Thunder forward into the storm-swept night. "Hold on, miss," he whispered into her ear as the rain lashed at them both. "I've got you now." Thunder's hooves pounded through puddles and mud as Mason rode hard, putting distance between them and whoever had been chasing the woman. The rain continued to pour down, but Mason kept her tucked close against his chest, trying to shield her from the worst of it with his duster coat. After an hour of hard riding, Mason spotted a familiar landmark, an abandoned line shack he'd used before during cattle drives. It wasn't much, but it would provide shelter from the storm and a chance for the woman to recover. He dismounted carefully, still holding her in his arms, and kicked open the weathered door. The interior was dark and musty, but dry. Mason laid the woman gently on a rickety cot in the corner, then quickly set about building a fire in the small stone hearth. As warmth began to fill the small space, Mason turned his attention back to his unexpected charge. Her breathing had steadied somewhat, but she remained unconscious, her skin alarmingly cold to the touch. She needed dry clothes and warmth fast. Mason rummaged through his saddlebags and found a spare shirt and a blanket. With gentle hands and averted eyes, he helped remove her sodden outer garments, replacing them with his dry shirt before wrapping her tightly in the blanket. He placed his rolled-up jacket beneath her head as a pillow, then sat back on his heels to study her face in the firelight. She was beautiful, despite the mud and scratches that marked her features. Young, too, perhaps 22 or 23. What had driven her to flee through such a storm, alone and defenseless? As if in answer to his unspoken question, the woman's eyes fluttered, open eyes the color of summer sage, wide with confusion and fear. Where she tried to speak, her voice a hoarse whisper. "You're safe," Mason said softly, keeping his distance so as not to frighten her. Found you collapsed by my horse during the storm. Name's Mason Yates, madam. I'm a cattle driver heading north to Prescott. The woman struggled to sit up, wincing with pain. They'll kill me, she whispered, her eyes darting toward the door. The Sutton gang. They murdered my father, and I saw everything. Mason's jaw tightened. The Sutton gang's reputation was well known throughout the territory, ruthless killers and thieves who'd evaded the law for years. You're safe here for now, he assured her. Storms washed away any tracks. Mind telling me your name, miss? She hesitated, studying his face as if searching for deceit. Finally, she spoke. Dahlia O'Connor. Well, Miss O'Connor, you need rest. We'll figure things out come morning. Dahlia nodded weakly, then slumped back against the makeshift pillow, her eyes closing as exhaustion reclaimed her. Mason settled himself across the room, his back against the wall, rifle across his lap. He wouldn't sleep tonight, not with the Sutton gang possibly still on her trail. The rain continued to pound against the roof as Mason watched Dahlia sleep, wondering what trouble he'd just ridden himself into. Morning came with stuttering rays of sunlight through the shack's single window. Dahlia woke with a start, momentarily disoriented before the events of the previous night came flooding back. She sat up quickly, wincing at the soreness in her muscles, and found Mason by the hearth, cooking something that smelled wonderful to her empty stomach. Morning, he said without turning. Figured you might be hungry. Dahlia pulled the blanket tighter around herself, suddenly aware that she was wearing only her undergarments beneath a man's shirt. Thank you, she said, her voice still rough, for everything. Mason nodded, spooning beans and bacon onto a tin plate. Storms passed. How are you feeling? Like I've been trampled by wild horses, she admitted, accepting the plate with grateful hands. But alive thanks to you. As Dahlia ate, Mason studied the map spread before him. We're about 2 days' ride from Prescott, he explained. I've got men watching my cattle herd about 5 miles north. Plan was to continue on today. He glanced up at her. Reckon you'll be coming with us now. I can't ask you to, you didn't ask, Mason interrupted. The Sutton gang doesn't give up easy. You'll be safer with us than alone. Dahlia wanted to argue, to insist she could make her own way, but the reality of her situation was undeniable. She had nothing, no horse, no supplies, and killers on her trail. My clothes, she began, looking around the shack. Hung them to dry by the fire last night, Mason replied, nodding toward a chair where her dress and petticoats were draped. They're still damp but wearable. I'll step outside while you change. True to his word, Mason exited the shack, giving Dahlia privacy to dress. Her clothes were indeed still damp, clinging uncomfortably to her skin, but she was grateful to have them back. She folded Mason's shirt neatly and placed it on the cot before stepping outside to join him. The world had been transformed by the night's storm. Puddles dotted the ground and the air smelled clean and fresh. Mason was saddling Thunder, his movements efficient and practiced. We'll ride double until we reach my men, he explained. Then we can find you a mount of your own. Dahlia approached cautiously, extending a hand toward Thunder's nose. The horse nickered softly, nudging against her palm. He likes you, Mason observed with the hint of a smile. Animals usually do, Dahlia replied. My father raised horses on our ranch near Tucson. At the mention of her father, Dahlia's eyes clouded with grief. Mason pretended not to notice, giving her a moment to compose herself. We should move, he said gently. If the Suttons were tracking you last night, they might pick up the trail again now that the rain's stopped. With Mason's help, Dahlia mounted Thunder, and Mason swung up behind her. The closeness was awkward at first. Dahlia could feel the solid warmth of his chest against her back, his arms on either side of her as he held the reins. But as they rode, she found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's gait and the security of Mason's presence. They rode in silence for a while, each lost in thought. Finally, Dahlia spoke. Why are you helping me, Mr. Yates? You don't know me. I could be lying about everything. Mason was quiet for so long that Dahlia thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low near her ear. My sister was killed by men like the Suttons 5 years ago. No one helped her when she needed it most. The simple admission hung in the air between them, revealing more about Mason Yates in those few words than hours of conversation might have done. "I'm sorry," Dahlia whispered. "So am I," Mason replied. "Now tell me about the Suttons. What happened?" As they rode, Dahlia recounted the events that had led to her desperate flight. Her father, Daniel O'Connor, had been a successful horse breeder with a small ranch outside Tucson. 3 days earlier, the Sutton gang had arrived, demanding horses and money. When her father refused, they shot him without hesitation. "I was in the barn," Dahlia explained, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "They didn't know I was there, didn't know I saw everything. I heard them talking after they were going to burn the house with me in it, make it look like an accident." "But you escaped," Mason prompted. Dahlia nodded. "Through the back of the barn. I grabbed my father's old revolver and what money we had hidden. I've been running ever since, trying to reach Prescott where my uncle lives. And the Suttons have been tracking you all this time. They realized I was gone before they could burn the house. Found my tracks, I suppose. I've seen them behind me every day since." Mason's arms tightened slightly around her, an unconscious gesture of protection that Dahlia found surprisingly comforting. "Well, they'll have a harder time catching you now," he said with determination. "My men are loyal, and we're all handy with guns." By midday, they reached Mason's cattle herd, about 40 head being watched over by 3 cowboys who greeted Mason with obvious relief. "Boss, we was getting worried when you didn't show this morning," called a grizzled older man with a silver-streaked beard. "Got caught in the storm, Hank," Mason replied, helping Dahlia dismount. "And picked up some trouble along the way. This is Miss Dahlia O'Connor. She'll be traveling with us to Prescott." The cowboys eyed Dahlia with undisguised curiosity, but their manners held. Each tipped his hat in greeting. "Miss O'Connor, this is Hank Miller, my foreman," Mason continued, "and that's Pete Cooper and Liam Jones." "Pleasure to meet you, madam," Hank said, though his eyes were questioning as they shifted back to Mason. "Miss O'Connor needs a horse," Mason explained. "And we need to keep an eye out for riders on our trail. The Sutton gang is after her." This announcement had an immediate effect. The men exchanged glances, and their hands instinctively moved closer to their holstered weapons. "Suttons, eh?" Hank muttered. "Bad business, that." "We've got that paint mare we picked up in Tucson," Pete offered. "She's gentle enough for a lady to ride." With the matter settled, the small group prepared to continue their journey. Dahlia was given the paint mare, a pretty spotted horse with a smooth gait and gentle disposition. As they set out, the cowboys naturally arranged themselves in a protective formation, Hank and Pete taking the lead with the cattle, Mason and Dahlia riding in the middle, and Liam bringing up the rear, constantly scanning the horizon behind them. As the day progressed, Dahlia found herself riding alongside Mason, grateful for both his company and his protection. There was something about him, a quiet strength, an unwavering sense of honor that made her feel safer than she had since her father's death. "Your men respect you a great deal," she observed as they rode. Mason shrugged, adjusting his hat against the afternoon sun. "We've been through a lot together. Started with just me and Hank 5 years back after I left home in Texas. Built the outfit up slow but steady." "You have your own ranch, small, spread outside Prescott," Mason confirmed. "Nothing fancy, but it's mine. These cattle will help pay off the last of what I owe on it." Dahlia studied his profile, noting the determination in his jaw, the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. At perhaps 28 or 29, Mason Yates had accomplished more than many men twice his age. "What about you?" Mason asked, turning those perceptive blue eyes toward her. "What was your plan heading to your uncle's?" Dahlia sighed, absently stroking her mare's mane. "I don't really know. Find work, I suppose. My uncle owns a general store in Prescott. Perhaps he could use help there." "No other family?" "None. My mother died when I was 12. It's been just my father and me since then." Grief threatened to overtake her again, but Dahlia pushed it away. There would be time for mourning later. Now she needed to focus on surviving. As the sun began to set, Hank called a halt near a small creek that provided water for both the cattle and the humans. The men worked efficiently, setting up camp with the ease of long practice. Dahlia insisted on helping, gathering firewood and assisting with the cooking. Her competence earned approving nods from the cowboys, who had clearly been uncertain about having a woman in their midst. After a simple but filling dinner, the men sat around the campfire, exchanging stories and occasional laughter. Dahlia found herself drawn into their camaraderie, grateful for the momentary distraction from her troubles. Mason sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his arm occasionally brushing hers. As the others settled in for the night, with Liam taking first watch, Mason walked Dahlia to a small tent they'd set up for her privacy. "It's not much," he apologized, "but it'll keep the dew off." "It's perfect," Dahlia assured him. "I can't thank you enough for all you've done." Mason shifted his weight, suddenly awkward in a way she hadn't seen before. "Just doing what's right," he said simply. Dahlia acted on impulse, rising on her toes to place a gentle kiss on his cheek. "Thank you anyway," she whispered, before ducking into the tent, leaving Mason standing there, his fingers touching the spot where her lips had been. The night passed peacefully, but dawn brought danger riding hard on their heels. Liam, who had taken the final watch, spotted the dust on the horizon just as the others were rising. "Riders coming fast from the south," he reported, his voice tight with urgency. 6, maybe 7 of them. Mason's gaze met Dahlia's across the camp. "The Suttons," he said grimly. What followed was a flurry of activity as the camp was broken down and the cattle urged to their feet. Dahlia moved with purpose, helping where she could, fear and determination warring within her. "We'll split up," Mason decided, gathering his men. "Hank, you and Pete take the herd north as planned. Keep moving at a steady pace. Liam, you'll come with me and Miss O'Connor. We'll head northeast, draw them away from the herd." "You sure that's wise, boss?" Hank questioned. "Splitting our guns like that." "The cattle are your priority," Mason replied firmly. "Get them to Prescott as planned. We'll meet you there." There was no time for lengthy goodbyes. Within minutes, the group had separated, Hank and Pete driving the cattle northward while Mason, Liam, and Dahlia rode hard to the northeast, hoping to lead the Sutton gang away from the valuable herd. For 2 hours they rode, pushing their horses as much as they dared. Finally, in a rocky ravine that offered some natural protection, Mason called a halt. "We'll make a stand here if they've followed us," he decided, surveying the steep walls of the ravine. "Liam, take position up on that ledge. You'll have a clear shot at anyone entering the ravine." As Liam scrambled up the rocky slope to his assigned position, Mason turned to Dahlia. "Can you shoot that revolver you brought, or is it just for show?" Dahlia pulled her father's Colt from her saddlebag. "My father taught me well," she said with quiet confidence. "I'm not as good as you men, but I can hit what I aim at." Mason nodded, satisfied. "Good, find cover behind those boulders. Don't shoot unless you have a clear target." They didn't have long to wait. The sound of approaching hooves echoed through the ravine, and soon 5 riders appeared at its mouth. They slowed, clearly wary of riding into what could be a trap. "That's them," Dahlia whispered from her position. "The one in the black hat is Jake Sutton, their leader." Mason studied the men from behind his cover. They were a rough-looking bunch, their faces weathered and hard, their eyes constantly scanning for danger. Jake Sutton was easy to spot, a tall man with a cruel set to his mouth and an ornate silver-handled revolver on his hip. "We know you're in there, girl," Jake Sutton called, his voice echoing off the ravine walls. "Come on out now, and maybe we'll let your friends live." No one moved or responded. Jake signaled to his men, and 2 of them dismounted, rifles ready as they began to advance cautiously into the ravine. "Remember," Mason whispered to Dahlia, "wait for my signal." The Sutton men moved deeper into the ravine, their boots crunching on loose stones. When they were halfway to the hidden defender's position, Mason gave a low whistle, the signal to Liam above. The crack of Liam's rifle shattered the tense silence. One of the advancing men cried out, clutching his shoulder as he fell. The second dove for cover as Mason opened fire from his position, forcing the mounted men at the entrance to scatter. The ravine erupted in gunfire. Bullets pinged off rocks and kicked up dust as both sides exchanged shots. Dahlia remained calm, waiting for clear targets as Mason had instructed. When one of Sutton's men broke cover and ran for a better position, she took careful aim and fired. The man stumbled, grabbing his leg where her bullet had grazed him, and crawled back to safety. The firefight continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Then, a cry from above caught Mason's attention. Liam had been hit. The young cowboy slumped against the rocks, still firing but clearly wounded. "Cover me," Mason shouted to Dahlia as he broke from his position, running in a crouch toward the slope that led to Liam's perch. Dahlia fired steadily, forcing the Sutton gang to keep their heads down as Mason climbed. He reached Liam, assessed the wound, a bullet to the upper arm, painful but not immediately life-threatening, and helped the young man to a more protected position. Just as Mason was about to descend, a movement caught his eye. Jake Sutton himself had circled around and was now approaching Dahlia's position from behind, moving silently through the rocks. "Dahlia, behind you," Mason shouted, already racing down the slope, heedless of the bullets whizzing past him. Dahlia turned just as Jake Sutton lunged for her. She fired, but in her haste, the shot went wide. Sutton knocked the gun from her hand and grabbed her by the throat, using her as a shield as he faced Mason. "Drop your weapon, cowboy," Sutton growled, pressing his revolver against Dahlia's temple, "or I'll put a bullet in her pretty head right now." Mason froze, his rifle still aimed at Sutton. "Let her go," he demanded, his voice deadly quiet. "This isn't her fight." "She made it her fight when she saw what happened to her pa," Sutton sneered. "Can't have witnesses, you understand, bad for business." Mason's mind raced, searching for options. Liam was wounded, unable to provide much help. The other Sutton men were regrouping, emboldened by their leader's advantage. And Dahlia, brave, beautiful Dahlia, was staring at Mason with a mixture of fear and something else, determination. In that moment, their eyes locked and some unspoken communication passed between them. Mason saw Dahlia's muscles tense slightly, preparing for action. "Last chance, cowboy," Sutton warned. "Drop the." Dahlia moved with unexpected quickness, driving her elbow hard into Sutton's ribs while simultaneously ducking her head. The sudden movement threw off Sutton's aim as his gun discharged, the bullet harmlessly hitting rock. Mason fired in the same instant, his shot striking Sutton in the shoulder, spinning the outlaw around. Dahlia broke free, diving for her fallen revolver as Mason rushed forward, but Sutton, despite his wound, recovered quickly. He aimed at Mason, hatred twisting his features. Two shots rang out simultaneously, one from Sutton's gun, one from Dahlia's. Sutton's bullet grazed Mason's side, tearing through his shirt and leaving a bloody furrow along his ribs. Dahlia's shot was more accurate, striking Sutton squarely in the chest. The outlaw staggered backward, a look of disbelief crossing his face before he collapsed to the ground. The remaining Sutton gang members, seeing their leader fall, lost heart. They fired a few more desultory shots before retreating, the sound of their horses' hooves fading as they fled the ravine. Dahlia rushed to Mason's side, her hands shaking as she examined his wound. "You're hit," she said, her voice trembling. "It's nothing," Mason assured her, though he winced as she probed the injury. "Just a graze. We need to check on Liam." Together, they made their way to where Liam had taken shelter. The young cowboy was pale but conscious, his arm bound with a makeshift bandage torn from his own shirt. "Did we win, boss?" he asked weakly. Mason smiled grimly. "We're alive. That's winning enough for today." With the immediate danger past, they tended to their wounds. Dahlia revealed unexpected skill at field medicine, cleaning and bandaging both men's injuries with gentle efficiency. My father believed everyone on the ranch should know basic doctoring, she explained as she wrapped a clean strip of cloth around Mason's ribs. Never know when it might be needed. Your father sounds like a wise man, Mason observed, watching her face as she worked. Dahlia's hands stilled momentarily. He was, she said softly, the wisest and kindest man I've ever known. When she'd finished bandaging Mason, their eyes met again, and this time neither looked away. Something had changed between them in the heat of battle, a bond forged in danger and mutual protection. "Thank you," Mason said quietly, "for saving my life back there." Dahlia shook her head. "We saved each other." Her hand rested lightly on his arm, the touch sending warmth through him that had nothing to do with his injury. They made camp in the ravine that night, deciding it was safer than traveling with their injuries. Liam, despite his protests, was given the only tent, while Mason and Dahlia sat by the small fire, speaking in low voices as the stars appeared overhead. "What will you do now?" Mason asked. "The immediate dangers past, with Jake Sutton dead, the rest of them will likely scatter." Dahlia stared into the flames. "I still plan to reach Prescott, find my uncle. Beyond that," she shrugged, "I don't know. Everything I had was at the ranch, and that's gone now." "You could rebuild," Mason suggested. "The land is still yours." "Perhaps," Dahlia acknowledged, "but not alone." "I don't think I could bear to return there alone." The unspoken hung in the air between them, possibilities neither was ready to voice aloud. Instead, Mason shifted closer, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his bandaged side. "You should rest," Dahlia admonished, though she made no move to create distance between them. "I will," Mason promised, "but first I want to say something. When I found you collapsed beside Thunder in that storm, I had no idea who you were or what trouble you were in. I just knew I couldn't leave you there." Dahlia's eyes glistened in the firelight, "and I'm eternally grateful you didn't." "What I'm trying to say," Mason continued, finding courage in her steady gaze, "is that I'm glad it was my camp you stumbled into. Not just because I could help you, but because I got the chance to know you." The confession hung in the air, honest and unadorned. Dahlia's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers intertwining with his own. "So am I," she whispered. They stayed like that, side by side, hands linked, watching the fire burn down to embers as the night deepened around them. No declarations of love were made. It was too soon. The emotions too raw and new, but something had taken root between them. Something with the potential to grow into something beautiful. The journey to Prescott took 3 more days, slowed by their injuries and the need to remain vigilant against any remaining Sutton gang members who might seek revenge. But no further trouble found them, and by the time they reached the outskirts of town, Liam's arm was healing nicely, and Mason moved with only occasional twinges of discomfort. They found Hank and Pete at the cattle yards, the herd successfully delivered and already attracting interested buyers. The reunion was joyous, with much backslapping and exclamations over their various adventures. Dahlia located her uncle's store on the main street, O'Connor's General Mercantile. The reunion was emotional. Her uncle Seamus nearly overcome at the sight of her, having already heard rumors of his brother's death. When Dahlia introduced Mason and explained all he had done for her, Seamus O'Connor grasped the cowboy's hand with both of his own, tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered cheeks. "You brought my niece safely to me," he said, his Irish accent thickening with emotion. "There's no repaying such a debt." "No debt," Mason insisted. "Any decent man would have done the same." But they all knew that wasn't true. Not every man would have risked his life and livelihood for a stranger. In the weeks that followed, Mason completed the sale of his cattle, earning enough to pay off his ranch and put aside a tidy sum besides. He had business in Prescott that should have taken days, but somehow stretched into weeks as he found reasons to remain in town. Each day, he visited O'Connor's General Mercantile, sometimes to purchase supplies he didn't really need. sometimes just to see Dahlia's smile as she greeted customers or arranged displays. They took walks in the evenings, getting to know each other away from the danger that had initially brought them together. Dahlia flourished in Prescott, her natural charm and intelligence making her popular with the townspeople. Yet Mason noticed how her eyes sometimes drifted southward, toward the distant horizon that hid her father's ranch. "You miss it," he observed one evening as they sat on a bench outside the church, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Dahlia nodded. "It was home for my entire life, even with the terrible memories of that day. There are 23 years of good memories, too." Mason took her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. "Would you go back if you could, if it was safe, perhaps," Dahlia admitted, "but not yet." "Not alone." Mason's heart quickened at her words, at the opening they provided. "What if you weren't alone?" Dahlia turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "What are you saying, Mason?" He took a deep breath, gathering courage. "I'm saying that these past weeks, getting to know you properly, have been the happiest of my life. I'm saying that I think about you from the moment I wake until I fall asleep at night, and even then, you're in my dreams." A smile bloomed on Dahlia's face, as beautiful as the sunset behind them. "And I'm saying," Mason continued, taking both her hands in his, "that I've fallen in love with you, Dahlia O'Connor, completely and utterly in love." Tears glistened in Dahlia's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I started falling the moment you lifted me onto your horse in that rainstorm, even though I was barely conscious." Mason laughed, bringing her hands to his lips to kiss her fingers. "That's not the most romantic beginning, but it's ours," Dahlia replied simply. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Mason Yates and Dahlia O'Connor were married in the Prescott church, with Hank, Pete, and a fully recovered Liam standing as witnesses. Seamus O'Connor gave away the bride, his face beaming with happiness for his niece. Their honeymoon was unconventional, a journey south to the O'Connor ranch near Tucson, where they found the buildings damaged but repairable. Together, they buried Daniel O'Connor properly on a hillside overlooking the horse pastures he had loved so much. "What do you think?" Mason asked as they stood hand in hand, surveying the ranch. "Could you be happy here again?" Dahlia squeezed his hand. "With you, I could be happy anywhere, but yes, I'd like to rebuild here. Combine our lands, your ranch near Prescott and this one. We could raise the finest horses in the territory." The next year was one of hard work and healing. They rebuilt the O'Connor ranch house, larger and sturdier than before. Mason sold his small Prescott property, using the money to purchase additional breeding stock for their expanding horse business. Hank came to work for them as foreman, bringing Pete and Liam along. Word spread about the quality of their horses, and buyers came from as far as California and Texas. The O'Connor Yates Ranch prospered, becoming known throughout the territory not only for its fine horses, but for the couple who ran it, the strong, quiet Cowboy and his capable, spirited wife. On the first anniversary of their wedding, Mason presented Dahlia with a special gift, a silver locket containing a tiny painting of her father on one side and a lock of Mason's hair on the other. "So you'll always have both the men who love you close to your heart," he explained as he fastened it around her neck. Dahlia's eyes filled with tears as she touched the locket. "It's perfect," she whispered, "and I have news for you too." Mason raised an eyebrow in question. "In about 6 months," Dahlia said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach, "there will be someone else to love." The joy that spread across Mason's face was incandescent. He lifted Dahlia in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing with pure happiness. "A baby," he marveled, setting her carefully back on her feet. "Our baby." "The first of many, I hope," Dahlia replied, her eyes shining with promise. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the land that was now truly their home, Mason held Dahlia close against his chest, marveling at how a single moment of compassion in a rainstorm had led to this perfect happiness. "I love you, Dahlia Yates," he murmured against her hair. "And I love you, Mason Yates," she replied, tilting her face up for his kiss. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the days to come." And as their lips met, both knew with absolute certainty that whatever storms life might bring, they would weather them together just as they had on that first rain-swept night when a fleeing woman collapsed beside his horse, and a cowboy lifted her up to ride through the rain toward their shared destiny.